Good morning and welcome to Wednesday's edition of Politics at Jack and Sam's Daily, the podcast that drags itself out of bed to tell you everything you need to know about British politics in under 20 minutes.
Good morning. It's October the 23rd, and as we speak, Jack, the Prime Minister is in the air heading to Samoa on the other side of the world, which is a 28-hour journey. Can you imagine Prime Minister, number 10 aides and lobby all trapped in a cabin for that long? I'm pleased to say that there have been signs of life in the last hour. The first briefing from the Prime Minister has just dropped, but talk about claustrophobic in there. Let's hope they all get out alive.
Let's hope so. You sort of imagine these scenes of sort of like that plane that crashed in the Andes and the people sort of eating each other. Less claustrophobic is this podcast, because me and Sam Coast are at least in different rooms in nearby each other in southeast London. We talk on a Zoom call, although it is still very early to be talking to you, Sam. There's loads and loads of stuff going on today, so we're going to have to zip through all this if we're going to get this done in 20 minutes. I do think that the Prime Minister is already embroiled in one of the most entertaining story of the day. He's going off to this summit in Samoa, which starts tomorrow, but already finds himself embroiled in a diplomatic row while he's in the air with Donald Trump, which is just a fantastic story and definitely the first thing we need to talk about. What else is going on today, Sam?
Later today, altogether more seriously, Yvette Cooper will be giving a statement on the South London shooting of 24-year-old Chris Kaba by a police marksman, after it emerged that Kaba was a gang member believed to have carried out a nightclub shooting 6 days before, but the police marksman, Martin Blake, still facing gross misconduct proceedings. MPs have loads of questions about that. We've also today got a second cabinet minister, Wes Streeting, coming out against assisted dying. The government is announcing a new defence security pact with Germany, which they say is the high watermark of defence relations with that country. There's an independent review into the water industry, which actually shows the government's taking a new tone and a new approach, which is quite interesting. And then we've got the latest on the budget as Rachel Reeves coughs to the fact that she and her chief secretary to the Treasury have been popping the balloons in celebration every time they make a settlement with a government department.
Oh my God, your story was actually true, Sam. They really do pop balloons. Are they special party balloons? Do they celebrate? Is there a glass of champagne in the Treasury every time they get a government department to agree to some brutal spending cuts?
It's definitely a moment of celebration, which I'm told has really irritated permanent secretaries who don't think it should be presented as that, not least that some cabinet ministers were hinting they could resign because the spending settlements are so tight. Is it appropriate? Rachel Reeves seems to be pointing the finger at Darren Jones, her deputy in the Treasury. Is it all his fault? Well, let's see. I can't find anybody else who remembers this tradition from the past, which is the case for the defence. One other story that sort of came true unexpectedly. You might remember on yesterday's podcast, I noted Wes Streeting was off to dinner with Morgan McSweeney on Monday night, and I was saying how central that suggests he is to the new Downing Street, the new operation. I omitted a crucial detail because I just didn't think it was particularly relevant. It might even have been personal, which was that Wes Streeting seemed to be dragging along to a work dinner his partner. His partner's called Joe Dancy. He stood in the general election unsuccessfully in one of the Stockton seats for Labour. And Joe was there too, off to dinner with Wes and Morgan. And I sort of thought, I'll just leave that out because it seems unduly personal to mention. Anyway, a few hours later, Joe Dancy is the new and has been appointed the new Executive Director of Communications for the Labour Party. So that dinner, presumably to crown Joe and send him on his way. Now, Joe Dancy in that job has a great big mopping up operation to do today, along with the Prime Minister, because it is the Labour Party, or the far left Labour Party, as Donald Trump would have it, that's under fire because the Trump campaign has accused it of electoral interference. Jack, do you want to explain what's going on?
This is such an extraordinary story. We are, of course, less than 2 weeks away from the US presidential election, maybe one of the most consequential elections of any of our lifetime. And we have last night the Donald Trump campaign making a formal complaint that the British Labour Party has broken US electoral law through what they call, quote, blatant foreign interference. in the election. Now, this story started to break last week when a senior member of the Labour Party, an official who heads up the operations for Labour Party, put a post on LinkedIn saying that there were more than 100 Labour Party staffers going over to America to campaign for the Democrats in the election. And she said in her post that there were still 10 places available and we can, quote, sort your housing if you want to come and join them. Now, I have known Labour Party officials in the past who have gone over to campaign in American elections. This is not an uncommon thing. I remember chatting to one or two back in 2016 who were going over to campaign for Hillary Clinton. It was always clear that they were doing this off their own bat, that they were, were going over to volunteer. They sort of get us a comment, or they get a few weeks leave by Labour to go over and knock on doors in some swing state. And this is not an uncommon thing. But this looked somehow more organised. This was the Labour Party's head of operations offering out places to do it. And it is that which has absolutely infuriated Donald Trump campaign. There are laws about foreign interference in elections, and they suggest this actually breaches that. Now, whether or not it does, I don't know, but it is certainly an absolutely disastrous row for Keir Starmer's party to find themselves dragged into 2 weeks before this election. There seems to be genuine anger amongst Donald Trump's allies about this, just as Keir Starmer has been trying to build bridges with Donald Trump, who it seems to me looks increasingly likely and probable to win this election and become the next president of the United States. He is not someone you want to be involved in a massive spat with just as he comes back to power. But that is where Keir Starmer finds himself this morning, Sam.
And it'll all come down to whether or not they breach the rules. And the rules are very straightforward. US federal election rules stipulate that foreign volunteers can't spend more than $1,000 helping US candidates. So if the amount that you're spending putting yourself up or helping in some other way, or even possibly your expenses amount to more than that, then there could be a problem. Now, I've been talking to Matthew McGregor, who is a Labour Party former staffer, activist, but also critically worked on Barack Obama's re-election campaign and has seen all this from the other side and the inside. And he said, look, the Harris campaign aren't paying for any of these people. People go and stay on the sofas of random Democrat activists over the country. The most that you really get out of it is a sort of bottle of Mountain Dew. But the problem with this is clearly it's been going on forever. I remember when Tory MP Simon Burns was backing Hillary Clinton. Nigel Farage has been backing Donald Trump for years, and you often see him in the lobby of the Trump Hotel. But the question is, the issue is, this has never been properly tested in a courtroom setting. And what the Trump campaign seemed to have done is formally thrown it over to the Federal Election Committee. The question is, how seriously do they take this? How much of an investigation do they do? Do people have to prove how much they spent, how much they received in free donations? The kind of legalistic aspect of this could tie everybody up in knots, as well as the diplomatic aspect. As you were saying, this is the last thing that Keir Starmer wanted, which is why he's had to address it on the plane in the last hour. In the plane, Keir Starmer to Samoa, Keir Starmer has been telling journalists that he doesn't think there's a problem here. He was talking about how he recently spent time in New York with President Trump and had dinner, and that they have a good relationship. And he thanked him for making the time. And said that everything that was going on here is within the rules. But there you have Keir Starmer desperately trying to hose this down. But it just depends how active the American authorities choose to be if they pursue it. And the kind of investigation will largely take place after the election. And if Donald Trump's in charge of the government, well, things could get in time sticky, and it could be something that Donald Trump, President Trump Mark II, if he's re-elected, comes back to time and again to Britain's detriment. I don't think it really matters whether they've broken the rules or not now. This is about how pissed off is Donald Trump with Britain and with Labour. There was Richard Grenell, the one of Trump's former ambassadors, who is now in the running, in fact being tipped by my Politico colleagues in DC as the front runner to be Trump's Secretary of State in the new administration if he wins, was on BBC's Newsnight last night asking, why is the ruling party of an ally playing politics and getting involved in actual campaigning? These are people who are very, very close to Trump.
speaking very angrily about the Labour Party coming over and doing this en masse, just as Keir Starmer's trying to build bridges with this guy. Like, Trump and Starmer are hardly natural allies at the best of time. Keir Starmer is going to have a real uphill struggle trying to keep this relationship on the road if Trump does win. This is a really, really terrible way to start, and you just wonder if it might escalate almost regardless of whether or not, you know, the federal investigation goes anywhere or not. It's also going to dominate the news cycle today, Sam. There's going to be questions for everybody, from Angela Rayner, who is standing in at PMQs today while Starmer's on his epic flight to the South Pacific, for Steve Reed, the Environment Secretary, is out and about talking about water policy today. He's going to be getting asked about it. Other ministers are out about, they're going to get asked about it. And once again, Downing Street gets completely sidelined by a story just as it tries to, you know, get back on the front foot this week with more positive stories than we've seen over recent months.
There is a story linked to Anglo-American relations that the government do want to talk about today that can be seen in this light. And I'm sure John Healey, the Defence Secretary, will get questions about what's been going on in America too. But in order to, as it were, shield and prepare for the possibility of a Trump presidency, Britain is, it's one of the motivations, but Britain is reinforcing its ties with European allies. And today is announcing a landmark defence security pact between the UK and Germany. Now, Britain and Germany and Britain and European defence closer cooperation, I think, legitimately can be seen as a response to a possible Trump presidency. Trump has been critical, particularly of Germany's lack of spending in the context of NATO, and so Britain and Germany sort of getting into bed together closer on defence things is notable. Now, there's going to be a treaty. There's an agreement that's been negotiated by John Healey. What this amounts to, as well as a symbolic tie-up between the two countries, is all sorts of bits of cooperation, both in manufacturing and in how we use and cooperate over the use of defence equipment over the coming months. So it does two things that look particularly important to my eye. First of all, it involves a pledge to bolster defences on the eastern flank, more joint working between Germany and Britain to, as it were, protect from Russia. And secondly, and this is the bit that really caught my eye, there's work on integrating air defence systems between the UK, Germany and other European allies. In other words, try and create a system to protect European airspace from long-range missiles. It's known as the Diamond system. And lots of our allies, as we do, have air defence systems, but they all can't talk to each other. So there is a process called the Diamond system, which is trying to get all these systems to work together to provide it's not quite the Iron Dome in Israel, which is one system to protect against short-term missiles. But the thought is there needs to be better European-wide protection that will include the UK to prevent missiles from entering all of our airspace. And that kind of cooperation, I think, is a bit of a landmark change.
Yeah, definitely. This is something Labour had talked about in opposition. It wanted to move Britain closer towards the Europe, particularly on defence. And I think what we'll see today is the first real tangible moment, a joint press conference with John Healey and his German counterpart in London, Boris Pistorius. We're going to see something similar with France. Britain and France already are pretty tied closely together with their two militaries, but the plan is to tie them even closer. And of course, this is all a reaction not just to the prospect of Donald Trump returning to the White House, but more broadly, of course, from the new threat from Russia, which has emerged over the past few years. It's not something that I think would have happened under the Conservatives. There was some reluctance to be seen to be working more closely with Europe for political reasons, but Labour very much seeing it in a different light, and I think we'll see more and more of this over the years ahead for as long as Labour is in power. The other thing Labour wants to talk about today is water and the water companies and sewage and some of those very political issues which dominated part of the general election campaign. The sort of big government grid announcement today is a major review of Britain's water industry. Labour are rather pleased that they've got the ex-Bank of England Deputy Governor John Cunliffe to lead that. He's a big figure in the city. The idea of putting him in charge of this review, Sam, is basically to signal to the city that This is very much, shall we say, a capitalist project. This is not Labour thinking about nationalising the water industry. What they really want is investment in the water industry to try and plug some of those leaky pipes that are causing the overflows and are so upsetting people as they see their waterways polluted all around the country. And they think they've got a bit of a coup having this guy leading it. His commission, though, isn't going to report back until next summer, but they're talking about bringing more capital investment into the industry and also shaking up the regulator, because there is some concern within Labour that Ofwat is not up to the job of dealing with this very controversial industry anymore.
What's interesting about this is it's being sold to the public, this review, as part of its tough action on the water industry. You know, the press release leads off on the fact that the UK and Welsh governments have introduced new powers to bring criminal charges against water executives and to ban bonuses, and that this independent commission will strengthen regulation, boost investment and further reform the water sector. But the crucial bit, as you say, is the increased investment. This is a slight change of tone. In fact, this is a big change of tone. Ahead of the investment summit that Keir Starmer did 10 days ago, there was clear concern from investors that Thames Water provided a reason not to invest in the UK because the regulators and politicians were beating up something they were putting money into, and they were just losing money on their investments. So actually what this is doing is sending a signal to the city that Labour has recognised and is listening to the concerns of investors, and given that the goal actually is to get more money in the system, having John Cunliffe from the Bank of England leading that review is a way of saying we recognise that not quite we got it wrong, but we know we need to look more investor friendly now, and that's the key.
There's something else to say about it as well, Sam, which is that it's probably 3 or 4 weeks ago we were sat here basically ranting at each other about the state of the Downing Street political operation while Sue Gray was still Chief of Staff, before we saw that shake-up, as these stories about, rather frivolous stories, frankly, about freebies and Taylor Swift gigs and all the rest of it were just dominating the news cycle day after day after day. And we were sat here banging our heads against our computer monitors saying, why on earth aren't the government actually doing something to try and change the conversation? I remember saying, announce something, guys, do something differently. Well, they've shaken up the Downing Street operation. We have new communications people in charge. And look what's happened this week. On Monday, the government is talking very loudly about NHS reform. They announce a big review into that. On Tuesday, the government is talking very loudly about criminal justice reform. They announce a big review into that. On Wednesday, the government's talking very much about sewage and water company reform. They announce a big review into that. And every day, the political conversation has been dominated by what the government wants us all to talk about. They haven't actually spent any money this week. They haven't actually announced any policy this week. All they've announced is a series of big high-profile reviews into these policy areas. But this looks to me like suddenly a much more political, thoughtful operation in Downing Street, which is trying to get on the front foot and trying to drive the conversation about the public service reform that it wants to talk about, rather than sitting back with its sort of feet on the desk, twiddling its thumbs and watching the political classes chatter about, you know, very critical stories about the government. And that seems to me a much healthier place for a government to be, at least in terms of trying to communicate to the public what it wants to be doing and what on earth the point of it actually is.
That's very trusting. Let's see if they keep it up.
We're only 3 days in, so I don't want to get too carried away. One
sleeper issue that I'm going to do in 30 seconds. Wes Streeting has come out against the assisted dying bill. Right. He did so. It's a great story in the Times. He did so in front of Labour MPs on Monday night. He said, look, I just don't think the palliative care systems, the end of life system, is good enough to allow people to feel that it's a genuine choice. Right. That's interesting. Second cabinet minister to go on the record after Shabana and Mahmood. But Wes Streeting's in a different category. He's the health secretary. He's the one that has to oversee any further regulation and any further moves to make this thing happen. How on earth can the health secretary be against something that he might have to implement next year and the year after? And with that, it's the alarm. So on that
sounds
thought,
very dramatic. 20-minute alarm. We are out of time. Well, that gives us all something to ponder about as we get on with our days. Sam, can we turn it off now? It's a bit noisy, isn't it?
It shuts you off. It's great.
Oh, right. Okay. Right. Time's out. We're out of time. We will talk to you all tomorrow when Keir Starmer will finally be in Samoa, hooling on the beach, and we will no doubt be chatting about that. See you all then. Thank you.
See you then.